we'll move into editing and or shooting tips for the Z1 as opposed to the X. So Clay, why don't you start us off there?
Okay, and somebody, I think Mick, you're going to help by bringing up the link.
Sure, let me do that. So
okay.
Can you guys see that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I've created like Mick has done, I've created a split screen view here. This is a wine shop in Tournon in the L'Hermitage district in France pre-COVID. So if you take a look at the images side by side, you can see my edits. So I've brightened up the shadows and so on. So Mick, if you'll close that tab, go back to the previous one.
Mm-hmm.
We have some hot spots, so swing to the left a little bit. And a little more. Okay, if you click on the curves, the word curves, I typically start my DNG editing with a curves adjustment. I find it's the most powerful way to quickly get what you want. And then I follow up with the standard things like bringing up the shadows, perhaps bringing down the highlights, increasing the saturation and so on. So click away from that, Mick. And if you click on additional masking, we'll get into masking. I found that the wine bottles under the bar were a little too dark. And by applying masking is a very, very powerful tool in Lightroom now. You can increase the brightness, the sharpness, whatever you want. And if you click away from that, we can take a look at some local sharpening. So this was an interesting shot. There's a lot of people walking around, and I propped my stick up in some wine bottles. And I love the color of this rosé. But of course, I didn't think ahead. I wasn't shooting at 5.6. So I had kind of a blurry wine bottle label. So by masking, you can increase the sharpness of just that area if you want. Okay, and on to something else. If you click on camera reduction, one of the easiest things that you can forget when you're stitching a Z1 DNG is to turn off camera reduction. Camera reduction is the default. And what that usually does is throw a stitch line somewhere in the distance. So you can actually see it in the before image. Click away. So you can see just before the word camera reduction, I've got some sort of double wood in there.
Yeah.
And by turning that off, it's an easy thing to forget. You'll know it when it happens. So yeah, so it's much better with camera reduction turned off. I think that should be the default in the Stitcher, frankly. Okay, back to the before. And if you click on noise and sharpening, and play the video, go full screen.
Can you see it?
Yeah, it looks good. Lightroom has done something really annoying. They've set the default sharpening to about 40 with no noise reduction. And if you accept those defaults, you're actually adding noise to your image. What I like to do is slide up the luminance, noise reduction, keep some sharpening, and then some masking. What masking does, and this is really important, masking doesn't sharpen areas of low contrast. It's kind of like unsharp mask in Photoshop. So just a tip, and I find this in some of my early Z1 shots, never, ever accept the default sharpening in Photoshop. It assumes you're using a DSLR and says, oh, you're gonna need some sharpening. Well, you don't want to sharpen without noise reduction. You're actually adding noise. And I sometimes wonder how many people are going crazy trying to reduce the noise when it shouldn't have been there in the first place. Okay, so if you close that, I think just escape.
Okay. Or nope, that didn't work.
Just click away from it. Ooh.
I'm clicking.
Okay. Yeah, click on the before image down below. Okay. We're on split screen now. That's okay.
You can see it?
No.
It kind of disappeared for me.
Yeah. The
let me just stop the
joys of
share.
technology.
I can try to pull up from my end, Mick, if you want.
Yeah, a couple other
click.
things I'd like to talk about.
Let me try clicking it again. Okay, here I'm back. So let me share it again. Okay, I'm here.
Okay, so if you click on blown highlights, we'll take a look at that. Now, if I had shot HDR, which would have been impossible in this scene because of people moving about, perhaps handheld HDR wouldn't have done enough. So I replaced the window using masking in Photoshop, actually. And rather than doing it on the 360 image, because it's very hard to match the look of what's outside the window, I actually pulled a patch in panel to VR and then masked the window, as you can see by the little black and white area. And then I just popped another street scene into that.
So this other street scene, Clay, is from a phone, or what did you use for that?
That was another 360 photo. And I just chose a portion of the scene that looked right outside the window. So sometimes, you know, if you can't shoot HDR, you're going to replace that window. Okay, so you can click away from that. And maybe just one more thing, masking for Flair. It's really typical with a Z1 to get flare around high contrast windows. So what I've actually done is I've masked it a little bit, and then I've also done a little editing in Photoshop, copying and pasting some of the wood texture from somewhere else. So Mick, if you just want to click back and forth between the before and after, so you can see some of the differences. We won't go to split screen. Oh, okay, we can go split screen. That's even better. So you can see the edits. This wasn't a commercial project. I could have done a little bit more, but I'm pretty happy with the shot. Okay, who's next?
Why don't we go over to Mick next?
All right. So let's see. For the Theta Z1, I'd like to share some tips for reducing noise. Now, a while ago, Sam mentioned this plugin called the DualFisheye plugin. The DualFisheye plugin is one of the best tools for reducing noise when you're shooting with a Theta Z1. Now, the DualFisheye plugin has several modes. There's Hdr Dng, bracket, and burst. So let's talk about those individually. Burst is the easiest. This is just going to take a series of photos, like I think 8 shots or something. Now, Hdr Dng is a mode where it shoots several photos and then kind of merges them in the camera. This all happens in the camera. You don't even have to send it to an HDR software. And that single image is going to have amazing dynamic range. And then the other mode is called bracketing, where it takes multiple shots, like 3, 5, 7, or 9 shots, and those shots can be merged in an HDR program of your choice, and it will have a lot more dynamic range. And in terms of reducing noise, I found that the bracketing mode results in the least amount of noise, has better shadow detail than HDR DNG. So if you're in a hurry, you can shoot with HDR DNG. But if you want less noise in the shadows, I would recommend the bracket mode. And we have a 10-minute warning, so maybe it's time for Sam to give his tips.
Up to you. If you want to talk a little longer, Mick, that's totally fine.
Finish your thought.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I guess I just wanted to give you guys a sample of what I meant. So here's just a sample of an HDR DN. This is shot with the bracketing mode, and yeah, it will let you capture a lot of dynamic range. Like you could see, you'll get the sky outside will have a pretty good exposure. Let's see another example of HDR DNG. Oh, so that was a bracketing. This is HDR DNG. So it has also a pretty good dynamic range, but if you look really closely, there's a little more noise. Now I reduced the noise in this case with third-party software. I like to use Topaz products, and so this one has less noise than in the original. But if you look at the original, it actually has quite a bit of noise. So that's why I usually shoot bracket with the bracketing mode if I want the least amount of noise. But the advantage of HDR DNG is that if you're moving, let's say you're walking or something and you take a photo, the HDR DNG can let you take an HDR photo without ghosting or with very little ghosting. So over to you, Sam.
Hey, okay, so talking about editing Z1, I'm sorry, there was one question also. Someone asked me about why my voice sounds good. I'm using a good microphone. Back to editing. We're going to go, hold on. We're going to do some screen sharing here, and I'm going to show a few images shot with the RICOH THETA Z1 and why I feel it's superior to the X in this case. So here we're in Adobe Lightroom. We have a JPEG shot with the RICOH THETA Z1 of an exterior nighttime crowd scene, a street festival. This is the original out-of-camera JPEG, and there's only limited amount of adjustment that we can do to it. But if we go to the RICOH THETA Z1 DNG file, we can see that this is a completely different image at this point. There is no way that I could have recovered this amount of dynamic range, especially shadow detail, with a JPEG file from any camera, the Z1 or the X. There was a question about using the Theta X for crowd shots earlier I saw in the chat. Not in very low light situations. The X is at its best in good daylight, in my experience, unless you're using a very long exposure. This DNG file is a single exposure. It's no HDR tricks, just a single exposure, a 1/13 of a second at 2.1 ISO 80. Again, if we zoom in, we can see the noise is very well controlled here. I have too many windows, so hold on a second. I got to move some windows so I can see what I'm doing in Lightroom. Now I'm in Lightroom. We can see my settings. Everybody can see my full window. Whoops. No, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm screen sharing. Everybody can see my full window, so we should be able to see my screen settings on the side here. This is the DNG file, still the fisheye file. We can see I've set the white balance. I've played with the exposure. I've knocked it up 1.2 stops, which is pretty decent amount. Pulled down the highlights and shadows quite a bit. texture, gives it a little bit more sharpness, clarity, affects local contrast. I've also played with the sharpening a bit, as I felt was appropriate in this image, although I was very interested in what Clay was just saying about adjusting the default sharpening. I'll be playing with that my next time around. Remove chromatic aberration in the original fisheye. You always want to do that, but you only want to remove chromatic aberration with this checkbox in the fisheye, not in equirectangular files. That creates a different type of artifact, which is best affected by defringe tools. Here, I did not use any brush work, or did I? No, no brushes here. But when we move on to the stitched equirectangular from that image, right, we can see that I've applied still more highlight and shadow adjustment, as well as some texture and clarity. I did not play with sharpening too much here. I left the default settings. I think I might have added a bit of noise, denoise, sorry. But what I did do at this phase is I added a few masks to further enhance the image. Lightroom's recent masking tool upgrades are fantastic for this kind of thing, because you can make a mask just to select the sky, right? In this case, I gave a little bit more white balance adjustment to the sky, as well as little teeny bit of pull down the exposure a bit. Then I made a copy of that mask and inverted it so I can apply different settings to the rest of the scene. In this case, well, it looks like I did nothing, but I made that mask anyway. So there you go. I also applied a standard linear gradient mask. Oh, that's why I didn't use the bottom, the other mask. The linear gradient mask to the bottom of the scene to just give it a little bit more exposure. So as you can see from the original JPEG file, which is what I would have gotten out of a camera like the Theta X, or a camera which will not shoot DNG files, these two images, whoops, yeah, we can do this. Right here. I mean, this is more or less the same as we would get with the Theta X. This image could have been overexposed a bit, but then we would have lost all the detail in the signs. And pulling up the JPEG, we would not have nearly the room. Whoops, sorry. Let me get those together. Well, these aren't exactly lined up, but we can see while the JPEG has decent detail, the DNG file, this is, you know, basically like a mini DSLR at this point. The shortcomings in the Theta Z1 DNG files are really only if you're used to staring at a high megapixel DSLR and you forget that you're, you know, comparing it to a small pocket camera. How am I doing on time there?
It's about time for our Q&A section if you want to wrap up. Okay.
Well, I'm more or less wrapped up. So anyone wants to ask me some questions, oh, wait, we have an announcement about the bracketing. Is it time for that? Or is that later?
Yeah, we can do that now.
Okay. Mick mentioned earlier in Facebook, but we have a big improvement. Everybody's been waiting for this, and this is something I have been requesting from RICOH since my very first meeting about the Z1 back in February 2019. RICOH Theta Z1 upcoming firmware upgrade will finally be getting auto exposure bracketing. That means that we will be able to set 3 exposures, 5 exposures, 9 exposures, 1 stop apart, 2 stops apart, just like a normal proper camera. I do not know the specifics of how this will work, but I expect it will be similar to allow a similar range of 3, 5, or 9 shots at 1 or 2 stops apart. It may allow more. I don't know that yet. I am also assuming that it will take advantage of the Z1 burst bracketing mode, And this will give all of us, especially HDRI people who've been requesting this feature, much more versatile bracketing with allowing us to use the preview in the remote control. I'm also sure that Yoichi will be adding some new magical features to the DualFisheye RAW plugin, and it will remain superior. But all that remains to be seen. We should be getting this new firmware upgrade is expected to ship for the Theta Z1 in May of 2022. So about 6 weeks away, let's say.
Thanks, Sam. So we can roll into some Q&A. We got a lot. So if we can't get to all of it, we can have our panelists reach out to you afterwards to answer. This is a basic one, but I have seen in the chat that we have a couple newcomers. So maybe someone could go back and explain, the basic reasons that your clients, or for your art require 360. What's the general benefit of shooting in 360?
So this is Mick. For me, like 360 is more valuable for documentation purposes. So let's say if you're shooting for a restaurant or something like that, then with a non-360 camera you can get details of the food, things like that. But if you want the customers to see what it's like, what to actually be at the restaurant, then a 360 camera or a 360 photo would be much better suited for that.
Thank you. Let's see, there were so many questions trying to figure out what the best ones were. Here's one for Clay. How is the X better than the Z for shooting crowd scenes?
It's fantastic. You're not fumbling with your phone, trying to hold a phone in one hand and a stick in the other. It's fantastic. And you can preview your shot. You can take a look at your shot right on the camera screen after you're done. It's a perfect camera for documenting crowds, fluid events. I love it. And you don't want to have to think about plugins or editing raw if you don't have to. Yeah, it's perfect for crowds. Absolutely perfect.
Thank you. Let's see. Someone asked about ghosting, or what do you? Sorry, what was that?
Back to life with HDR. Don't use HDR in situations where people are moving a lot.
Can I address that?
You can fix it in post. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, Sam. Am I on screen?
Yep.
I've been doing some experiments with noise. Yoichi actually pointed out some interesting flaws in Lightroom that add a lot of noise in dark areas. But you tend to get a lot of noise with HDR in camera, and you tend to get a lot if you shoot brackets and then merge to HDR in Lightroom. What happens is when you do deghosting with merge to HDR, the deghosting area picks up a huge amount of noise. It's really, really bad. And then of course, the other trick with the default settings for sharpening, never leave the sharpening without noise reduction in Lightroom. So you've got to be careful. My choice, as Mick also mentioned, my choice for dealing with noise in dark scenes is shooting a burst, as many as you can, at least 9. I think now you can do 17. Is that right? 17 shots, noise stack in Kandao RAW. Kandao, another camera. But the software is amazing. And what you can actually do is you can set a key frame and it kind of ignores moving objects in the other frame up to a point. So if you have a dark scene without blowing out windows, you want to do a burst and noise stack in RAW+.
Thank you, Clay. There were also a couple questions about editing software. What's your opinion on the best? To any of the panelists that want to take that one.
I like RICOH. I love Adobe Lightroom Classic. It's easy to work with. It does most of what I need. It is frequently updated and quite affordable. I know some people don't like the subscription model. I know some people are uncomfortable with the interface, but for me, it does what I need, and it does it quickly and efficiently. I use it for all my photos, DSLR, Theta, everything.
And if I can just say something, the non-destructive workflow, if you haven't worked with Lightroom before, is a game changer. You make edits to your DNG, they're just layered over top of your image. You can go back, change your mind later. Nothing gets destroyed, nothing gets changed. It's a very effective editing tool.
Yeah, I've been using Lightroom for like 10 years and I've been a fan of it. But another software that I like for 360 editing is Affinity Photo. And what I like about it is that it lets you switch from the equirectangular view to the 360 view and back. And each one you could make a lot of different types of edits. So for example, if you wanted to add your logo or you wanted to add your tag, like a text, things like that, Affinity Photo is really good for that. And best of all, it's not subscription. You just pay for it once, I think $50 or something like that. It's so worth it.
I agree.
Great. And I think we have time for one last question. One attendee bought the Theta X for a big paying client. I'm assuming this may be real estate. They're debating on getting the Z1 instead for such a high paying job in order to produce high-end quality tours. Any thoughts on which one you might use in that scenario?
DSLR for the highest quality.
Well, that's true. But between the X and the Z1, I would choose the Z1 in that situation.
Also.
So since we still have a lot of questions that we didn't get to, maybe I can make a suggestion where, you can go on Facebook and you can comment on the post from RICOH, let's say, and then we'll try our best to answer those questions in the comments. What do you guys think?
Tag any of us and we'll get back to you.
Yeah, where did you want to do that? In the X, which group would you like to do that in?
Theta X group, we can do it.
Yeah, that's probably the best place.
Yeah, Sam, could you maybe share
on.
in the chat what that group is so anyone who's not a member
link. And hold on a second, everybody. Here's a link in the chat to the RICOH Theta X user group. I'm the admin of this group, and anybody who wants to ask questions about the X or the Z1 or follow up on anything in this video, please feel free to do so there, and all of us and more will get back to you soon.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We'll also send that link around following the session, along with a recording of the conversation, so you can go back and look at anything again that you might have missed or want to revisit. So thank you so much to our amazing panelists for joining us, and everyone for attending. Everyone have a good morning or night, depending on your time zone.
And we'll see you all on Facebook.
All right. See you in 360.
Cheers, everybody.
So long.
Thank you, RICOH.